Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Day Zero podcast. We're on episode lucky number 13. And yeah, so before we get into it, I just wanted to say, happy Thanksgiving to our Canadian friends out there. It seems Auntie decided to steal our holiday, though, because he's not with us today.
Yeah,
So,
the one non-Canadian is the one that doesn't show up today.
yep. So, at least somebody got the holiday. So, yeah, so with me is Z. And another thing I wanted to say before we jump into the topics is on Wednesday, I'm probably going to be doing a live stream on the Android binder use after free we talked about last week. I thought it'd be cool to, walk through it and potentially try to exploit it. I just have to figure out what's going on with building Android because it's a bit of a pain in the ass. But yeah, so that'll probably be at 8 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. So I'll be streaming that. And the other
So
thing is,
what's that?
oh, go ahead.
5 p.m. Pacific, I think. For everybody
I
on the
think
other
so.
coast.
Time zones are hard, so. But yeah, I think it's 5 p.m. Pacific. And I just wanted to amend something I said last week because I was saying that it might be a good exploit to jump into if you were new to exploitation, but I might have been wrong just because it seems to be an OEM specific issue. So it's only on certain devices like the ones I listed that day, so like the S8 and stuff. So yeah, we'll talk about that more on the live stream on Wednesday. But I just wanted to add that kind of addendum in there before we started.
Yeah, I mean, in all fairness, though, it did look like a pretty straightforward exploit. It's just, the availability, and you've been running into a lot of hassles getting that up.
Yeah, it's just the like trying to get it going to be able to even access the bug. So
Right, well,
all
we could
right.
probably start jumping right in here with the iTerm issue earlier this week. Um, I was having a little bit of fish trying to find like all the technical details. It looks like essentially, the gist of it is an attacker who can control output on your terminal. Obviously, if you're using iTerm 2 on Mac, can result in an RC. The actual details of that, I'm not super clear on. It's using tmux. It seems like metadata gets passed in somewhere. What I did notice was the patch itself moved from session names to session numbers, so that was involved somehow. And it changed to using an Objective C string for the evaluation instead of just the raw string. I don't know what the actual exploit itself looked like, though. I don't know if you were able to dig anything up on that.
Yeah, so I mean, they did have the video here that showed them running the command, but I
Yeah,
I
that
didn't.
doesn't tell you much. Like, you don't see what output was actually provided by that connection. You do see it
Yeah,
start tmux, which kind of led to a question of, do you need to be using tmux in order for this? Or I think it's part of the integration. So I think it happens regardless. Like, you trick it into thinking it needs to execute tmux or a certain session or something like that. That's what I believe the issue is. But yeah, the video wasn't totally clear.
yeah. I mean, all the video really seemed to show was them popping calc from the server, which I thought was pretty cool. Popping calc, but I couldn't find too many technical details on it either. But I do remember when you posted it, you wanted to talk a bit more about the Mozilla open source support program. So I looked more into that than I did the technical side of it.
Okay.
Um,
Well, we'll leave a link here at least in our notes afterwards with um, the patch itself. If you really want to dig into this, I was looking at it a bit. You can kind of see some of the fixes here, like the changing this format is mentioned in the description as part of the fix itself. So it was that this format for set title string and what were the other two? Status left and status right. So again,
okay.
I couldn't find the proper details on it, but I mean
Yeah,
that's
I'll be
about the best I can
honest.
do. If you want to dig into it, the patch is there. Obviously, this is open source. Uh, but yeah, if we want to talk about the open source support program, so Mozilla has their open source support program, and one of their things is secure open source, the SOS fund, essentially funding security audits of various applications. One thing I know is so in their discussion or in their blog post, they end up mentioning, they work together with Radically Open Security, who actually did the audit, and iTerm2's developer, singular, George Nachman. Not sure if I said that correctly. But this is just another one of those cases, a single developer working on something that a ton of people use.
Yep.
And I went and looked, the commit log, like the next most commits on the project was from somebody that hasn't committed since like 2014. So,
Wow.
like, yeah, this guy's working alone on this. I mean, I
What
know
a
it happens a
trooper, dude.
ton. I mean, even working with having some big companies as a client, I've seen some like hugely important applications that are being used like inside of companies, and it's like one guy who does that as his job. And then you see this in open source, like I don't know, it's gotta suck for that. I always like working with somebody on projects, so kind of unrelated, bit of a sidetrack, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm glad to see Mozilla actually supporting some of this, putting some of the funds towards securing open source. 'Cause they started this after Heartbleed, which
Yeah, I mean, Mozilla couldn't talk today. Mozilla's always been a bit of a more security oriented company than a lot of other companies in this space. You know what I mean? Like they've always had a bit more of a focus on privacy and stuff like that, which I thought was cool.
an
Um,
apparent focus. I mean, people would definitely, especially now, debate on how genuine that is. But yeah, they've at least had that track record.
yeah, I mean they've had some issues. I remember they had that cert issue earlier this year. Um, and to be honest, I think their browser is probably one of the less secure browsers of the ones out there, just because there's not a ton of people looking at it like there are with other browsers.
Well, and I mean, you're
Although,
kind of losing the competition too, with like IE moving on to Chromium.
yeah, and the other thing I wanted to bring up, like regarding browser security, I don't want to talk about it too much because it's actually from July, so it's not too new. But I didn't see it at the time, so it was new to me. But they actually started their own browser fuzzing framework called Grizzly for Firefox. So
Oh, I
I
wasn't
thought I'd
aware of
mention that.
that.
Yeah, I didn't see anything about it, so it was kind of. I guess it was just kind of a quiet release. They didn't really, broadcast it too much.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Um,
they're going to be the big users of it, being it's their product.
yeah.
But I don't know. I want to jump back though onto the actual issue, the
Okay.
iTerm issue. There was some discussion, like I was already mentioning. Do you need to be using Tmux at the time? I don't think so, but that is a little bit unclear because it is in the Tmux integration. Another thing though is this attack has been present for at least 7 years. That's a pretty long lifespan. Obviously, we don't know if it's been used too much. Like, I don't know if any active cases using it, but that is a pretty long lifespan for a vulnerability. And I definitely saw some concerns over, oh, well, you need to be able to produce output on the terminal. And on one hand, that seems unlikely. On the other hand, tail dash f your logs and you see it.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, like, it seems from the POC and stuff that you would need to like SSH into somebody's server or something like that for it to really be practically used. And I just don't think it's a practical enough vector. You know what I mean? Like you're not
I
really
don't
gonna hit
know.
a ton of people with that.
I mean, I think it really depends on what type output we need to get in there. I mean, sure, okay, if it needs to be in a air log or not an air, if it needs to be in like an access log or something, yeah, you're pretty limited in the types of characters you can get. But in a lot of application logs, you can get quite a bit of information in there, and people will tail those logs and look at them. Or just somebody that uses email from their terminal. You can probably get a fair number of the necessary characters into that also. But yeah, it's unclear exactly what you need. But I feel like there's probably some very creative avenues to exploit this that maybe we just haven't seen yet. Granted, it's patched, so maybe we just won't see it.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, they don't link to too many technical sources in here, so it's hard to tell. I did want to bring up something from chat though. Mal got asked if do you guys think you could do a stream on deep diving into Malloc and Free and heap stuff and UAFs. We actually do want to do some video content on that. I don't know if it'll be streamed. It might be on our YouTube channel, which you can find under the stream. Uh, we'll talk more about that when we get closer to it, but we do want to do that type of content. So just so you know that is in the future plans, I think.
Yeah, one of our goals is definitely to get into providing some somewhat easy to digest educational content. Kind of trying to cover some of the more technical stuff that you just don't see in a lot of YouTube videos in a concise manner. You might see somebody streaming a CTF problem for 5 hours. That could be helpful, but that's also 5 hours you've got to give to it. So that is something we want to do. Neither of us are really all that great at video production. I mean, this stream is about as low production quality as we can get while still having the feature set that we want.
We're boomers.
So we're learning a bit in order to be able to produce that, but it is a goal to provide some better content than just these podcasts.
Yeah, we'll make some security anime for. No, just kidding. But yeah, we do plan to do those videos. All right, so let's talk about the Windows Error Reporting Manager. So I remember you wanted to suggest the title was based on this one.
Yeah, that's where I got the title. When your errors have errors. And I mean, basically, it's a pretty straightforward issue. You've essentially got the Windows Error Reporter that will go and look for an existing report.wer file in the report queue. When there's a crash, it'll look for this file, create a temp file, write to it, and then overwrite the old file. While the most technical or tricky part of this is basically using symlinks, so you end up overwriting other files, because this happens as a system user. So you're able to essentially cause Windows Error Report to overwrite like a DLL in System32 or something along that line. The trick to that is being able to create a proper junction. You usually need to have privileges to do that on Windows. But there is a talk from James Forshaw, Link to the Past, which kind of covers creating junctions as a limited user. We'll include kind of a link to the PDF that covers that in our description, but that's probably the only tricky part of it. But yeah, I mean, I've already kind of summarized it. You do a symlink from the report.wer to a victim DLL, whatever you want, sitting accessible by system. And you have your .temp going to the payload, cause the crash, and you can... The report.wer does need to be a valid thing at first. You can use some timing to essentially have that exploit work out. The write-up here, again, link in the description, really clear, covers this really well. So I know I'm fumbling this description. Super straightforward. Covers pretty much everything you want to know. Honestly, great write-up. I've never heard of Elman Consulting, but it's a good write-up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I've actually heard this issue is not too uncommon.
No, it's definitely symlinks. Like, it's a common issue, just not checking for that and being able to overwrite stuff.
Yeah, I got asked about these kinds of issues before, and then they were like, "Have you ever heard of a junction?" And I'm like, "What the hell's a junction?" It's the Windows terminology for a symlink, basically. I don't know why Windows or Microsoft has to invent terms for things that already exist.
Symlink, junction, hardlink.
Yeah,
I mean, there's effectively. I mean, there are minor differences between these different things.
Yeah.
So like differences do exist, but yeah, it is a pretty common means of privilege escalation. Just, when you're sitting on like an average server, you're probably going to find an issue like this to give root to get system. With hardened systems, obviously people are probably here thinking about consoles, so hardened systems, it's maybe a little bit less likely. But in general, when you've got a lot of applications installed, yeah, super common. I mean, I've definitely run into this a lot. I mean, it's basically a talk to, like a time of check, time of use race condition with symlinks. And I mean, everybody seems to make those talk to issues.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it seems a lot of the Windows issues that we've covered on this podcast are almost all file system permission bypasses. Like all of them. It's crazy. Like they're like 10 to 1 on Windows vulnerabilities, it seems. But the one thing that I thought was cool was if you scroll to the bottom to the timeline, you can see that they were actually pretty quick in fixing this. It was reported on the 22nd, and it was reported as fixed on the 27th. So it wasn't even a week, and they had it fixed. So I thought that deserved a little bit of a credit there because
Yeah, fixed, but then not out till the next patch Tuesday, which could have been longer. That's once a month. But to
yeah,
be fair, I mean, that is a quick turnaround time on it. It's also a reasonably easy fix.
yeah. So building on top of service issues, another service issue that happened, but wasn't Windows, was actually ZDI reported on a macOS system escalation through the disk management utility. So macOS has this daemon called Disk Management D, and it uses a mock server for interprocess communication (IPC). And so, did you want to summarize what the bug was? Because I remember you were
I
saying
mean,
you
I
looked
could.
into this a little
My
bit.
summary is pretty generic. Heap-based buffer overflow looks basically like it ends up being an off by one. Ultimately, when you do the calculation, it ends up being able to read or write 4 bytes after the end of the reply buffer. Just kind of giving a primitive, your read write for exploit, but they don't have the full chain in this.
Yeah. So I looked a bit into the technical details. Let me just find where it is on the page because, okay, there it is. Yeah, so they talk a little bit about how this overflow happens. So they have this hex 1000 size buffer, and then they have I think it's like a hex 38 header because that's when the input starts, is from there. But they seem to do this weird like alignment operation where they and the length with the like the last byte is ANDed with hex FC. So what ends up happening is hex C8, which is the last byte, which is correct, actually ends up turning into hex CC. So you end up with a 4 byte overflow on the length. So you can leak 4 bytes or write 4 bytes, and that's a like they even mention it here. Like that's a really solid primitive to have.
Yeah.
Um, like especially with that leak, right? Because that's often kind of your limiting factor with those kind of exploits is you often need a leak, and it sucks having to rely on another bug. So leaking and writing 4 bytes, that's a really powerful primitive. So uh, yeah, I thought I'd mention that, and I thought the technical details were kind of cool. I don't know exactly why they did this weird alignment operation. Uh, like
I mean,
obviously,
it's
I don't do Apple
probably more
stuff.
dealing with optimization than anything else. Because you don't want to have unaligned access.
Fair enough.
That's it. I do just want to head one thing off. Um,
Yeah.
People should kind of realize by now that you tend to release old exploits, like 700-day-old exploits. So there won't be any PS4 exploits. We will be talking about the PS2 during this stream, but nothing about the PS4.
Yeah, there won't be PS4 stuff. Sorry. Um, since we're talking a little bit about the chat, though, I did want to read out a comment by another one by Malgod talking about heap exploitation. Yeah, I mean that's so you were just saying that you need more detailed information about it and stuff. One of the reasons we want to do those kinds of videos is because it seems a lot of the resources that are out for heap exploitation are like white papers and they're dense. They're like 10 to 15 pages long with just like size 11 font, like 1,000 words a page. And it's just like you have to be a math major to figure out what the hell they're even talking about. So yeah, I just wanted to add on there that yeah, I can kind of see the struggle of why it's hard to find resources for that kind of thing. But yeah, that's a bit of a sidetrack. Um, so yeah, I obviously getting back to the topic. I mean, I don't really do Apple stuff. I know you don't really do Apple stuff, so it's hard to talk too technically about it. I'd like to get more technical, but Apple stuff, it's just you gotta have experience in it to understand a lot of what's happening. Just because it's so different from a lot of other stuff. Like Apple, everything is their own kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Yeah. So you know that link will be in the description if you want to check it out.
But yeah, we can go from talking or saying we don't want to go into too much detail about Mac OS to another Apple O Day.
Another one.
Yes, from
They're just getting pounded this year.
Morphisec. I guess they were finding this one was discovered through I guess a malware campaign was using this one. I'm going to be honest, I have some questions here, but again, to kind of summarize, right from the article here, Morphisec identified a new and alarming evasion technique that the same adversaries adopted while targeting yet another enterprise in the automotive industry. Um, so I find it interesting that they are talking specifically about attacking the automotive industry. This is where I kind of wish Auntie was on this podcast, maybe share a bit of insight on that. But I mean, they do seem like a juicy target. To talk about the vulnerability itself, the Apple software update utility that comes packaged with with iTunes. And interestingly, if you uninstall iTunes, you still have their update software left. It doesn't uninstall the software update. Has a unquoted path vulnerability. Essentially, on Windows, or well, on anything, if you have a path that's not quoted, so like C program files, and then you have like a path to some executable in there, Windows will first look at C program and see if that's a binary. If it is, it'll execute C program and use all those other words as just arguments into it. And so on down the line. If you have like C program files, some space company, then it will look for program file some and things like that. So this malware essentially ended up setting up a C program binary that would be executed. What's not super clear. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you can continue. I'll go after you.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, what's not super clear is, was this actually targeted at Apple? So they give some compliments to this group, saying, you know, this group must perform serious reconnaissance research to consistently stay one step ahead of the defenders.
Yeah, so I actually did look into this a little bit. I just wanted to say, yeah, it kind of sucks. I wanted to ask Auntie a little bit about this BitPaymer campaign, but I did look into it a little bit. So it seems that it targeted a bunch of different industries. It apparently targeted finance, agriculture, tech. I just read it more into the campaign because I think like a month earlier or something they had an article about the campaign. And they talked about some clever things that the malware did. So one thing I thought was really cool was, well, cool, you know, in the context of malware, is that they actually, the reason they tried to hit the software update utility for something like iTunes is legitimate processes that are from like common vendors like Apple. When they execute a child process, antiviruses don't check it as much. They have a lower confidence score when they check it. So, you know, when you hit those kinds of software that are signed, it's easier to evade antivirus. So I thought that was kind of a
Yeah,
clever
so what's
trick.
not clear to me, though, is if they were even targeting the Apple software update. They created something called C program. That was their
Yeah.
binary. Any application that has this type of unquoted path issue in trying to execute something under program files is vulnerable to this and will execute that binary, not necessarily the Apple software update. So I'm not convinced that they actually knew it was an Apple software update, and it might have just been something that they realized a lot of places had.
Yeah. I
That,
just
that's
wanted
kind of where
to.
I was going with that.
Oh, okay. I was just going to answer a question from chat. What's your favorite device you've exploited in the past? Honestly, I mean, it's kind of boring. Like, it's not very exciting, but my favorite is desktop, like just, you know, Linux VM kind of stuff, because it's a lot nicer to work with. You don't have to deal with a lot of stupid stuff like you do with some other devices like consoles.
Well, on
So,
the other hand, on desktop, you can also have some really weird, stupid stuff that will actually kind of cover um, particular code reuse vulnerability or defense. That would be a real pain, but you know, on desktop, you can see a lot of experiments too.
yeah. Yeah, so I just wanted to answer that. Um, yeah, so I don't think we have too much more to talk about on that. We would if we had Anti here, but he ditched us. So no,
Yeah, and I mean,
that's no
I'll
worries.
just mention this is another one of those really common issues, unquoted path. We've actually covered another one before, which um,
Oh,
it was
I
in
don't
a
remember.
launcher that had an unquoted path, so they were able to get RCE out of
Oh,
it.
was that QT?
Yes, that's the one I'm thinking of, the QT
Uh
bug.
yeah, I just remember that. Okay, I didn't
Well,
think
I
of
guess
it
it
that
was
way.
kind of QT. I mean, the bug was in software using it, and then the fact
Yeah,
that QT let them load plugins is where the RCE came in.
yeah. So we'll talk about some wireless keyboards, broken strokes. So this was a white paper that you posted on there.
Yeah, and initially I was kind of expecting this to be about um just, hey, wireless keyboards don't encrypt the content, everybody can read everything. And I thought that's going to be all, but one thing they say actually pretty early on in here is that it works regardless of the encryption scheme.
Yeah, they say it works regardless of the encryption scheme, the protocol, the presence of radio noise, physical obstacles. Like it's kind of crazy how many things don't matter when you're trying to sniff for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, what they're doing here is they're sniffing, not so much knowing what you're typing, but detecting keywords or sequences of keystrokes by eavesdropping on the encrypted communication. And it does that through analyzing essentially the inter-arrival time between your adjacent keystrokes. They kind of figure out what keystrokes you're typing on the basis of how long it takes between the keystrokes. And I
Okay.
mean, that isn't a new attack. What is new is doing that over the encrypted channel. That's been done over acoustic channels a ton. And other forms like vibrations. I think that's been used for like pin codes before using the accelerometer. Uh, but yeah, this is the first time I'm seeing it being done over an encrypted channel.
So I wanna start off by saying I really like this paper, mostly because it seems like it's very practical. They give a
Yeah.
lot of data that shows that, these attacks aren't some like theoretical attack that you need a bunch of prerequisite conditions to pull off. It seems like something you could legitimately go into something like a cafe and and pull off. So I thought this paper was really cool.
Yeah, I don't
And
know.
the other thing,
I'll just mention the cafe thing. You might have a lot of interference with the cafe. They do mention how accuracy drops. One is they get further away and more interference. Like it's not perfect.
oh yeah,
So I mean, it's definitely something like, especially if you had more time to train it, it could probably be quite useful even in that scenario. In fact, although at the same time we're talking about a cafe, how often do you take your wireless keyboard to a cafe?
fair enough. That was kind of a bad example. I guess another example could be something like maybe even like a conference, security conference. Some people want to bring,
Or
if they
wireless
don't
keyboard
know any
with them?
better.
I don't
Hey,
know.
some
I
people
I
don't know any better,
still I don't know if I'd be using a I don't think I'd bring around just a keyboard. I don't generally carry a keyboard with me. I take a mouse, but a keyboard's a little bit more bulky.
Fair enough. I mean, I just brought that up because I was at DEF CON and I remember somebody talking about wireless mice and how he was surprised to see people using them, saying that they can use that to hack people's computers and stuff. I mean, I don't really see how you could really do that with a mouse as much, but a keyboard, yeah, keyboard I can see
Well, I
being a
mean, if
lot
you've
more
got some
dangerous.
Ode in the mouse or whatever, I don't think anybody's really going to drop that there. That said, I
No,
guess
probably not.
a conference room keyboard could likely be wireless, could likely give you some passwords. So
Yeah,
that's something.
that's a good point. That's a good
Like, I
example.
mean, I think it's definitely a practical attack. It's just having the right scenario to use it.
Yeah. So I remember earlier you were talking about the training, and they actually do talk about that a bit in the paper. And they were talking about how you could obtain smaller training sets. So using stuff like social engineering to get users to enter stuff through like emails and social networks and stuff like that. So it's cool that they talk about some of the ways that you can actually collect that training data to make it more accurate. And the other thing that they talk about is also why this, is even an issue. And they talk about how wireless keyboards, you want to use the minimum amount of operations over the radio frequency as possible. That way you don't burn the batteries too quickly. So that's why they, it's like kind of that performance security trade-off, which I thought was neat that they mentioned too.
Yeah, which is a fair point. I mean, that how that basically ends up weakening it. Although it also, I mean, a usability aspect. If you have a larger latency to include more characters or something, um, you're introducing latency. You don't really want that on a keyboard.
Yeah.
Well, see you, Melgod. We will have a YouTube video up of the same thing, or you can catch the VOD here on Twitch before they delete it.
Yep. I think it's like 14 days or something like that.
Yeah.
And so we talked a little bit about the success rates. I don't think we talked about the numbers. So just to state it, just so you guys can see how practical this attack is if you're listening. When you're at a close proximity, it has a 90% success rate, which is pretty high. If there's a line of sight issue, like if there's some kind of obstacle that's blocking line of sight, it's about 80%. And if it's behind a wall, 73%. I thought that was kind of crazy how it was still that accurate from behind a wall. I figured a wall would, kind of kill the attack strategy, but 73% isn't a terrible
Yeah, I mean,
success rate.
you're going to have questions about the type of wall and stuff too. But I guess a standard wall doesn't really block all that much in terms of radio frequency, so it's not super surprising, but yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, so like you said earlier, we're not going to talk about the PS4, but we are going to talk about the PS2, and that's because CTERT actually released a PS2 basic exploit. So for those of you that don't know, CTERT actually released the 1.76 PS4 kernel exploit chain. So he decided to go back in time a little bit and look at the PS2. So a bit of a backstory around this is he mentions in his write-up that Sony basically tried to do some like tax evasion by shipping demo discs in the EU, in the PAL region. So they shipped these demo discs that have basic, which is a basic interpreter, to try to get it classified as a personal computer instead of as a console because the taxes were lower, I guess. It didn't work. He says right there that it ultimately failed. But I thought that was kind of neat because I actually didn't know about that. I had a PS2 when I was young, but obviously I'm in NA, so NA didn't get those this ship with it. So.
I hadn't heard about this either. Which I think is part of why he kind of raises the question somewhere in here about why more people didn't look into the basic. And I have to feel like part of it just kind of comes down to one, it was just PAL. So that limits both like Japan and North America, which are NTSC. And I'm not sure if necessarily PAL region just is really saying for EU, or if it was actually like the entirety of PAL.
I think it's the entirety of PAL because he says all PAL region PS2 consoles. So
well, he says that, but then he talks about being for tax reasons, and I can't imagine every PAL country has the same tax loophole.
I'm not sure.
It's a minor point, though. My point is, though, just I mean, it was definitely limited in terms of who even would have seen this. And even from that, I think a lot of it also came down to. Actually, let me find the actual sentence.
Okay. So
there we go. In the conclusion here.
Okay, that was quick.
Well, I already had the quote ready to go. Basically, find it odd how the PS2 release of basically received so little attention from hackers, given that it was bundled with every console in the PAL region for the first 3 years. Easy to dump and analyze, and open source code. And I think part of that also has to do with just the timeline. Back then, it was mod chips, or even some of the hat cards and stuff, back on the N64. But what it wasn't was software. I mean, even FreeMcBoot was a 2008 thing, so like 8 years after the fact. You had NetBSD, there's some Debian-based distro that you could also run on the PS2. It was a time where homebrew was a thing, yes, but it was a lot more focused on mod chips, not so much the exploits. So I'm not super surprised that the scene at that time wasn't looking at it.
Yeah.
That said, Free McBoot right now is really quite practical. To be fair, the slims that don't work, I don't think are all that common. It is just the latest ones, like one of the last revisions. Most people own a game as long as you have a DVD burner. You can get one of the games that you can do this with, and it's easy enough to do the swap trick. This is what we recommend for the Save MGO project. We tend to recommend people use Free McBoot to get onto Metal Gear Online.
Oh, fair. I didn't even think about that connection. That's cool that you could talk about that a bit with Save MGO. But yeah, he does actually mention Free McBoot in this write up.
Yeah, it's
He
at the
was,
beginning. He
yeah,
mentions that he'd rather have well, I guess in his mind, perhaps a more convenient.
yeah. I mean, he was stating the reason why he looked into it was PS2 is a bit inconvenient, in his own words, to mod. He was saying you have to get a memory card with Free McBoot pre-installed on it, or you have to open up the system. Which, if you don't like doing hardware stuff, or if you're worried about breaking it or stuff like that, you
Yeah,
probably don't want to
it's
do that.
not like it's not that bad. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think this is just a fun exploit because this is a language exploit. The exploit here, since we haven't actually talked about the exploit, we're talking about everything else.
Well, yeah,
Integer overflow, and a signed comparison lead to kind of this large uninitialized buffer that you can end up just accessing anywhere within. So you get access to the entire memory space to read or write. It's double, so there's a little bit of, or it's accessed via double, so you have to convert like floating point values. But other than that, it's a fun little issue, and it's in a language. I haven't attacked too many languages. The last time I did one was a DEF CON qualifier challenge. It's fun, so that's why I do like this exploit. I think it's just a fun thing to look at regardless. Uh,
yeah.
but I mean, if you actually want to get into the homebrew, Free McBooth really isn't all that bad.
Okay. So one thing I did want to point out is there's actually two bugs mentioned here. You found two vulnerabilities in Yeah Basic, but one of them wasn't present on the you couldn't use on the PS2 because I think it had to do with loading libraries, and you can't like Sony blocked that permission on the PS2. I think the first one was a buffer overflow. So dim was the integer overflow, and then yeah, create subar link was the first vulnerability, but it couldn't be used on the PS2. So yeah, so the integer overflow you're talking about was actually on computing the size for a multi-dimensional array, because I think they support like up to 10 dimensional arrays or something stupid like that. So yeah, so just a simple integer overflow. It wasn't too hard. So using that, he went from getting arbitrary read write to code execution. Um, yeah, so if another bug that's pretty easy to break into, I think. The source is public. It hasn't really been updated. Even if you want to look at doing some vuln hunting, this might be a good project to look at. Yeah, basic, right? Because it seems like there's some pretty low hanging fruit bugs. So it might not take you too long to find anything compared to more modern projects.
Yeah,
So
but you do also have to be on the PS2 or PS2 emulator, which, to be fair, PCSX2, he mentions using their debugger.
yeah,
Their debugger has improved like tenfold since I was using it.
I've heard
It
it's
used to
super
be
good.
a really a pain in the ass to use. Back when I was using it for Metal Gear Online. Um, so much better now. Like it's actually kind of usable now.
Okay, cool.
But still, that is kind of a bit of a
I,
hurdle if you're trying to get into exploit stuff. Maybe not jumping onto the PS2.
okay.
Although, the PS2 is a system that doesn't have, or at least generally isn't using, a lot of exploit mitigation, so kind of got that going for you.
And there's a lot of resources out on it. I think, like you can probably find
Yeah,
talks
there's a
about
good
it
bit of
and stuff like that.
documentation
So
available.
yeah. Uh, but another thing I found funny was at the end he makes a bit of a joke saying Sony can argue that it really did allow the PS2 to be freely programmed after all and claim back import taxes. So there you go, Sony. If you're listening, there's a little tip for you.
I
Uh,
don't know if there's a
Criticize
timeline
YouTube.
on that, though. Like, if they
Yeah, I
can
don't
really
know.
claim it 20 years after. Obviously,
Gotta
they're
get
not
McKenna
going
in here.
to, but...
Yeah. All right, so
But
let's
yeah,
get to our
it is
last
also just a
exploit.
good write-up. I'll just say that. I'd like to take a look at after the fact here.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
All good. So we'll talk about Imperva. So apparently Imperva's a security company and they had a breach, so that's not the best thing to have as a security company.
No,
Um,
but their response here, I think, is a really good example of what a breach report should contain.
okay, so this will be interesting. I think we might end up disagreeing a little bit on this because I have some critiques of it.
It's not
But
perfect, but go ahead.
yeah, so one thing I did want to say is reading this, it kind of reminded me of the first season of Mr. Robot. It sounds a lot about what happened with Allsafe, you know what I mean? Like just uh the way that it happens, like they were specifically targeted and stuff like that. So by the way, talking about Mr.
With
Robot,
All Safe, wasn't that when they went through the thermostat or something?
no, that was when they were hacking
Oh, okay.
eCorp. No, the Allsafe was actually, I think it was an employee was blackmailed into bringing a disk in to
Oh, yeah,
infiltrate the
then,
network.
yeah, now I
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah, and that's also another reason why this kind of reminds me of that is because the way they describe it, it kind of does sound like it's a there could have been some inside involvement because I think they talked about how it happened was there was an unauthorized admin API key that got leaked for
Well,
the production AWS server. So
at least that's not really how I got. So my understanding of what happened here
yeah, maybe I'm wrong.
is
Let me
kind of
see.
down here in this section. Um, Basically, they created a database snapshot for tests. So this is when they're moving to the AWS relational database service. So they're going from hosting their own database to using a cloud one. So they create a snapshot for testing. They create just an internal compute instance. So like, EC2 or whatever. Um, Create that instance. It's accessible from the outside world because it's just convenient for developers. They need an AWS API key to access that snapshot they made, to start using the database service. Uh, the compute instance gets compromised. The AWS API key, which needs to be there, does need that key, is stolen and then used to access the snapshot. This doesn't sound like an insider thing to me. This sounds like they left this box running a lot longer than it should have. It wasn't patched. Somebody broke in that way. And they do
Fair enough.
mention like one of the things they could do better in corrective action, in this corrective action section, is um, decommissioning inactive compute instances.
Okay.
That is something they mentioned. So it sounds to me like this is just they set up a development thing. They had it online because that was just easier for devs to work with, and they left it online far too long.
See, I wish they would have said how that server was compromised, though. Like maybe they don't know, which fair enough. But I feel like that's an important piece that they're not. Like I didn't really see anything about it. They talk about how they learned of the exfiltration from a third party requesting a bug bounty, but they don't really talk about like you know how it happened. They say it did happen and what they're gonna do to try to fix it. And like you're saying, it seems they left that server up for too long, but they don't say exactly how that server was compromised. So that is one thing I found weird about the report.
Yeah, I mean, at least they do mention though that the snapshot was from September 15th, 2017, and based on log analysis, the exfiltration occurred in 2018 or October 2018. So like it wasn't their production data. Well, I mean, it was a snapshot of their production database, but it wasn't the production database.
Yeah,
But yeah, we don't really know exactly what the vulnerability is. I just imagine, if they have this thing running for a long time, they just didn't update something. Like I feel like this could have been a script kiddie type thing. You've got an exploit. Let's just find all the machines that are vulnerable to it and own them that way.
yeah. One question I have about this report though is they said they found out about it on August 20th. So like it took them almost 2 months to publish this. Like that's quite a while to have known about a security incident and not say anything. You
Well,
know
it
what I mean?
sounds like they did go through and contacted. Where was I just seeing that? Contacted appropriate global law enforcement agents or organizations and regulators.
But I mean, what about their customers? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that'd be something you should be telling them within a week.
So this isn't their initial announcement.
Okay.
They announced this previously too. This is an
fair
update
enough.
on the security incident. Yeah.
Okay.
This is like their after action. They found out about it. They've previously announced it. I'm not sure how long it was. Not sure if we can find that on this blog somewhere.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think they.
Yeah, like they don't have. Oh, you have this blog link. Maybe that'll, or that just gives us the same thing. Very useful.
Does.
Yeah, actually, clicking blog takes you to the same link.
Awesome.
Or not. Oh, there we go. Now it's updated.
Okay, so you found the older one, or? Oh.
Well, I'm still looking for the older one here.
Okay. While you do that, I just do want to go back to Mr. Robot for 1 second. Did you see what the episode name was yesterday? Because I thought that.
No, I haven't been watching Mr. Robot since sometime during like second season.
So yesterday's episode was season 4, episode 2. So 402, and the episode name was payment authorized or whatever it was. It was the same as the HTTP error code for 402, which I thought was pretty funny. I thought that deserved a bit of props. Payment required. That's what it was. So
yes, I guess put that in. Somebody's concerned about spoilers there.
I just said the episode name, man. I'm
not spoilers. Who knows what that means? Yeah, I don't see a blog post for it, but I'm quite sure they had like an announcement before, because this is specifically an update on it. It does mention an update on the security incident. So I wouldn't hold them to saying like it took them this long. It took them that long to actually go through and figure out everything that happened. Fair enough. I mean, like, my feeling with this is it's nicely written. It's got a lot of the big questions answered. Not all of the details, but most people don't need all of those little details. It doesn't matter what exploit was used for most people. All that matters is it was compromised.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know. I feel like this has, like, kind of, even as somebody with more technical understanding, like, I get this issue. They created the database, internal compute, a thing was compromised, API key was leaked that way. Like, I get that. That's a good bit of information. Like, that's what happened. I can't tell you exactly, like, I can't recreate it, but I don't know. I felt like this, had a good bit of information. It was concise.
Yeah, I mean, I'll walk back a little bit of, my initial criticisms when I read it, because you were saying that you think they've done an earlier one, and if that's the case, then, that was like my main thing, was that it seemed like it took a long time to hear about it. But
yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a link to that.
Yeah, and that's fine. You're just
I'm just trying to Google it to see if I can find something that comes up for it. Yeah, it looks like they disclosed the data breach. This is some other forum, but cybersecurity firm Impervia discloses data breach on August 27th, which I think was the day they had actually come across it.
Yeah, they discovered it on August 20th, so it was a week later. But that's still that's a lot better than I thought originally. So, yeah, I'll take back what I said on that. Yeah. So, did you check out much of the EU statement on the 5G network security?
Yeah, I've definitely kind of looked over it, and I mean, it's actually a pretty clear report. Like, the actual report is 33-ish, 35-page report. It's a pretty clear report, but it is just looking at kind of a high-level look at some of the security concerns. A lot kind of policy-oriented and not too heavy on the technical details. We probably don't need to jump into this for too long. But their big concerns were poor software standards, just as 5G is a lot more software-defined versus just custom hardware, and concerns about supplier tampering. Um,
One thing I thought I'd ask is like, is this real 5G? Because you know how like mobile networks say like 4G or 5G, but it's like
this is about the actual 5G hardware.
okay, so it is.
Like the planned rollout of that, and there's been concerns about some like the Chinese companies, and that's one of the things I kind of want to bring up. They have this section on the likelihood of a supplier being interfered with by a non-EU country, and it seems really obvious they're talking about is it Hawaii? I'm not sure how to say their name, but that phone company,
Huawei.
Huawei.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's it. I've
yeah, that's
when
what I
I
say.
hear somebody say it, I know what it is, but I never remember.
Yeah, it's a
Uh,
weird spelling.
yeah. Well, it almost looks like Hawaii. So,
We're going with
uh,
Hawaii.
so I mean, it seems they don't specifically mention this, but obviously the U.S. has raised a lot of concerns about them. But a lot of the guidelines they don't actually talk about any specific company providing the hardware, but what they do mention are some guidelines that you can use to kind of judge. One of them is a strong link between the government and the supplier. The third party country's legislation, lacking like data protection and things like that. Characteristics of the supplier's corporate ownership is a government owner, something like that, and the ability for a country to actually pressure that company. And yeah, okay, so we see that a lot with the Chinese companies as, China's able to apply a good amount of pressure in there. But I feel like this point might actually come to bite US providers too. Because the US doesn't have strong data protection. And they do have the ability to pressure companies, as we've already seen with like AT&T, like with ISPs installing things for spying and privacy. So I feel like that might come to bite some the EU, or sorry, that might come to bite the US in the ass if they uh, try and provide for the EU.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of wish that ISPs were under the same kind of regulations that they are in the EU, because Canadian and US ISPs are just they suck, dude. Like, and
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think they need to be bit in the ass a little bit by policies like this.
or well, in this case, it's really the lack of the policy, lack of data protection.
Yeah, but I mean, like, maybe this will kind of help give them a push towards
Maybe
trying some of
I
that
don't
stuff.
think it will,
That's
honestly.
probably yeah, that's probably too optimistic, but and by the way, yes, that is absolutely true. ISPs should be using Nano. Everyone should be using Nano. Um, but yeah, one thing that I thought was cool from their little report here is their timeline. So they were saying by the end of this year, they should agree on a toolbox of measures to address the risks at a national and European Union level, and then by next year, October, um, assess the effects in order to see what's needed for further action. So I guess we're not really going to see like since they're willing to, push that off a little bit until the end of 2020. I'm guessing we're not really going to start having to worry about issues like this until around then. Like I don't know when
No, I
the
mean
projects are
5G
planning to push out
rollout
5G.
is going to be complicated because
Yeah.
5G needs the broadcast stations to be a lot closer together, so they're going to be a lot more frequent. They're smaller units; they don't need like these big towers anymore. Um, it almost feels like it's creating more of a mesh network. They're going to be essentially a lot closer together, a lot more frequent. So there's just a lot of logistics that are going to be involved with actually getting that out.
Yeah, and I think they mentioned that too. And that could be where like, in that kind of confusion of trying to put that out is, you were talking about the supply chain and stuff. Is that maybe I misread it? Is that what they were talking about? Like
No, that was
if this
one.
would be more vulnerable?
That was in a different area, but yeah, they did talk about just the supplier's ability to provide.
Yeah.
Um,
So I mean, it's there's not too much in there at the technical level. It's all policy stuff, but it's worth mentioning because eventually, we will probably see 5G, even though we probably don't need it. 4G is enough for most of us, but
no, I need that. I don't even know what the transfer speeds are, but I need at least gigabit internet on my phone.
yeah, for downloading all those movies and stuff. But
Linux ISOs.
yeah, yeah, installing new operating systems all the time. So you mentioned this earlier, measuring attack surface reduction in code re-randomization.
Yes, I was referring to this when I was talking about one of the um techniques. So basically, this paper is essentially talking about trying to prevent JIT-ROP style attacks. So essentially, it's looking for the gadgets. You get a read primitive or something, and from there, you're looking for the gadgets that it can use dynamic, like at runtime, at exploit time.
Yeah, so I'll explain that a little bit. So basically, you just use like an arbitrary read primitive you set up, and then you just scan a memory area for usable gadgets. The only thing with that is obviously you have to make sure you scan memory regions that are executable, or else you're just going to end up crashing with an access violation. And I think they actually talk a bit more about that in that paper.
Yeah,
Sorry,
they
you can
do
continue. I just wanted
talk
to bring it up.
briefly about. No, that's fair. I mean, essentially, that's what they're looking at. It's not just general ROP. And they're looking at how re-randomizing the code um, through a few different techniques actually impacts the gadget availability. And I'm just going to say straight up, the very first technique they end up talking about is this shuffler program. And here we go. It does function level re-randomization at runtime every few milliseconds. This basically, like, I'm pretty sure I've done a CTF challenge that was like this, that would re-randomize itself like every second or something. Like, this just sounds like a pain in the ass. It sounds difficult to deal with.
Like from an exploitation perspective, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, it also sounds like it brings a ton of overhead, which it does, but I mean, re-randomizing the function order every few milliseconds. It's a bit excessive, or it's quite a bit.
So I think in their summary, they actually did talk a little bit about finding an optimal re-randomization interval, and I think they talked about it being from 4 to 17 seconds or something like that.
Yes, that they did mention that. That said, like, I'm just saying, like, their advertisement, like the Shuffler website, mentions it being in the milliseconds.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, like, I don't remember seeing anything about it being at the millisecond level in the paper, but
oh no, that's not it. No, it was on. I just went and looked up their website.
Okay.
I just don't remember what I had Googled to find it.
Yeah. So I will mention one thing about the paper that I kind of didn't like is it seems a lot of their stats were oriented around Turing completeness. That's like their main measurement, it seems. And in most cases for exploits, you don't need a Turing complete gadget library, you know?
No, but they do mention that, and I mean, Turing complete isn't a high standard. Essentially, your read and your write and your add, and like being able to do a little bit of arithmetic. It's not a lot.
Yeah. So they actually mention in the paper we only consider those attacks that utilize system calls. That's a quote from the paper.
Yeah.
Which, fair enough. They do state that outright. But, a lot of ROP chains and stuff, you don't need to use system calls. There's like plenty of other ways you can go. You can get very creative with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, their conclusion here is that current fine-grained ASLR, like these re-randomization techniques, don't impose significant problem, is what they kind of come down to. That's their... At the end, they talk, like, I'm pretty sure that's almost a quote from the conclusion.
I was going to say, like, do they mention, like, do they think it's not worth the performance trade-off for the overhead?
I don't think they actually mentioned that specifically.
Okay.
I think they just mentioned that, down at the base here, our findings suggest that the current fine-grained randomization solutions do not impose significant gadget corruption. Or they do mention specifically somewhere here. I don't see exactly where it is, but they do mention the instruction level randomization, which actually moves that around, which does cause a problem. It destroys like 90% of all gadgets. So, you know, if
Yep.
one of these is the winner, it's Zipper, which does the instruction level randomization.
There you go.
That's something
Yeah,
I'd never thought about. But yeah, so it ends up moving around your instructions. So you have like one instruction in one place, the next instruction somewhere else, and it runs kind of inside this VM that knows how to jump around.
that's messed up.
So the jump
I don't know how
instructions
that
aren't
works.
there. So if you just take control of your program counter and try to execute, it just executes that one instruction, and then you're into invalid memory, or not invalid, like illegal instructions. Sorry.
That's kind
Um,
of scary, dude. Like if that can actually be like
and it
made so
had
that it's
pretty
not a massive
low.
performance.
Well, it was less than 5%.
Oh, well, hopefully nobody uses that. Just kidding.
I've never seen it or heard it. Heard of it? Yeah, less than 5%.
I don't even know how you'd bypass that, dude. Like you'd like that would break JOP too, not just drop. So like you'd be pretty much left with data only attacks if that were practical
Yeah,
for
well, I don't
use.
even know if it randomizes some of the data too or not. I'm not sure. It does use kind of a virtual machine that it runs within, but it is kind of a static rewrite also. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it might be fun to look at. I don't know if it's really being used anywhere or if like it's expensive or something like that. But yeah, they do mention like that as like the 90% effect of.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. That being said, like I mean, if it's depending on the re-randomization interval, like I just thought of this. If you're re-randomizing it every couple milliseconds, not like,
Well, so
every couple hundred.
Zipper is a static thing.
Oh, it's a
It
static
happened,
thing.
yeah.
Okay.
Zipper
'Cause
doesn't do that all the time. It runs at a or what's that? Well, I guess maybe that was a. So it is a runtime thing. Obviously, it has the VM, but it is just a static rewrite.
it's a one-time thing, yeah.
Yeah, like
Um
X. I'm trying to read here. Keeps the same layout until you rewrite it again. So like it doesn't change at every load or anything. Like some of like only Shuffler is kind of runtime and loads itself like continuously. The other options, one of them will do it at link time, so while you're building. Another one here is load time reordering. So that does it every time you load the program. But this
yeah.
MCR just does it. Actually, both of these, MCR and CCR, were both build time ones. That happened. So the one clearly says link time. The other one says install time, but in the actual description later on, it seems to indicate that it happens at link time also.
Oh, okay. So maybe a bit of a typo there or something.
Well, I'm
Um
sure there's a reason if we actually dug into exactly how that one worked, but I mean, it. Most of them, three of them, are not involving runtime at all.
yeah. But the one thing I think that is worth considering when you're continuously rewriting it on an interval is, it might not be optimal, but an exploit could technically just keep waiting for a randomization that gives them the gadgets they need. Like every time you
A brute
re-randomize it,
force.
there is yeah, like a brute force. Yeah,
That sounds like old school defeating ASLR with brute force, and
yeah,
it might work on 32-bit. I don't know how lucky you can get on a 64-bit re-randomization, especially when it's doing it at this like very fine grained level.
yeah, yeah. It's a fair
Um,
point. I just
like
thought
I
it was
mean,
worth mentioning because I didn't even think about that before. Like that is something worth considering. Is that every time you re-randomize it, you do introduce a chance to introduce a new gadget that you didn't have before.
yeah, and there is
So
also the chance of actually exploiting Shuffler itself. I
that
mean,
too.
obviously
Yeah,
you're adding code in there. There is the chance of that exploit too. Um, like it does increase your attack surface.
yeah. Which this paper is actually on a little bit of it. So there you go. So yeah, so I guess we'll move on to the finding security threats that matter. So
Yeah, so this one is definitely a lot less technical than the last paper. It's mostly about stride and what they're calling e-stride. Now, unfortunately, their footnote for what e-stride actually is goes to a textbook. I think I actually have the textbook, but only volume 2, and it's in volume 1 or something. I remember I was
Oh,
looking
okay.
at it. Either way, I don't have access to the paper that actually describes in greater detail. But the gist of this was just basically comparing two different approaches to threat modeling. The one is a very systematic approach, kind of the traditional stride approach. You enumerate your components, your assets, your data flow, and then you assess kind of on each of those components all of the different stride threats. So stride threats being spoofing, tampering, repudiation, info disclosure, denial of service, elevation of privilege. Um, we use this at my last job. Oh,
Yeah, I was gonna say this sounds like something that would be like, something that you'd probably be dealing with a lot. So they were saying that stride was basically assessing risk after you've analyzed threats, and then e-stride is the opposite. You bypass the
yeah.
threat and analysis by analyzing the risk first, and then doing the threat.
Yeah, that was the key difference. With the stride, you would do the systematic stuff, enumerate everything, find all your threats, and then look at those threats and which ones are at risk, which ones have you protected, or which ones have unresolved risks, and those are your findings. Whereas E-Stride, right up front, what are your biggest priorities? What are your critical assets? And what are the stride threats against those? So basically, you're looking at your risks right up front instead of doing it after you've enumerated everything. And this kind of the methodology here, I feel like a lot of vulnerability researchers kind of already do a bit of this. In kind of that research phase, when you're first starting up on a project, you're doing a lot of research into how something works. I feel like that's where you're already kind of falling into that E-stride category. You're trying to decide what the most critical risks are. Um,
Yeah,
so like I may not agree with necessarily calling it E-stride. Like I definitely like they also have like you doing data flow diagrams and a bunch of stuff that I mean most people aren't doing. But the concept here I feel like kind of applies to the vulnerability research, or even if you're not necessarily doing this formal look. And what the study basically came down to after comparing those two findings was that E-Stride, doing your risk up first, focusing just on those critical assets, led to more high-level issues being discovered in the same time frame, whereas Stride found plenty of medium and low-level issues, a lot more, but not as many high-level issues or high-rated issues. Which I think kind of like it makes sense. If you're focusing on the critical stuff, you're going to find the critical issues.
yeah. So the core focus of the paper was the empirical study of like pitting two teams against each other, one using um, stride and one using e-stride. So I did want to mention they do cite some validities or threats to the validity of the results. So they see that, or they say that the performance of the team can, be impacted by how they work together, like the cohesiveness of the team. So the higher performing team might have had a better cohesion than the other one, so that could impact the results. And the other thing they said was that the E-Stride team actually consisted of an additional member, which was a trainee, so they had to factor that in when they were talking about the results. So I did want to bring those up because those are
Yeah,
kind of
they
important
mention it,
factors.
and this also is a very small case study. Um, but I think it kind of makes some intuitive sense on why E-Stride kind of found more high level issues. But that isn't to say the systematic approach doesn't have value. Like those smaller issues, the medium and lows, those can be chained to become a high level issue. Um, and just a side note, I do want to talk about one comment once we're done this topic.
Yep, yep, that's fair. Um, so I guess what you'd take away from this paper is that you want to kind of have a mix of both approaches, right? Like that's what
Yeah,
I'm
like
kind of
I'd
taking away
say
from it.
they're talking about using it like those DevOps, like agile teams, fast moving, work fast, break everything type teams. For those teams, like yeah, okay, focus on your critical issues, but you should still do the systematic approach every so often and get and deal with those low, medium rated issues. They do matter, and sometimes some that's low or medium somebody can think of some way that actually makes a huge impact. Like I've seen some things that might be rated low normally, but then it's like, well, your application's like only goal, like it's just like an information disclosure. But the application's whole purpose is like protecting that information. So it's actually a high, but it's really easy to kind of count it as a low when you're going through its stride.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think both matter. Both processes matter here, but in terms of like for research and getting onto something, obviously you just want to find your RCs, you want to find your big issues. But for companies, having the systematic approach helps just to be very thorough and kind of catch everything and be mature about your approach in it, not just focusing on the immediate issues.
Yeah. One thing I did want to say about this paper is I found it remarkably even-handed. Like, it didn't seem like they were like a lot of the white papers we read, you can tell they're kind of flavoring it, kind of trying to sell their trying to sell a point of view on it. This one seemed to be like, they mentioned the threats, which I thought was really good. And like, I don't know, I just found that they didn't favor one method over another, right? You could tell that it was very objective.
No, and their conclusion didn't favor one over the other either.
Yeah.
Like throughout the entire thing, yeah, it was very fair and balanced. They weren't trying to push one over the other. Just here's an actual look at the results, and these are the results, and left it at that.
Yeah. So I think they should get some props for that.
Yeah.
So we'll visit that question about the kernel level.
Yeah. So
memory
our
rewriting.
nano user asks, would any of those in-memory code rewriting algorithms work on the kernel level? Heard you guys mention that works the hypervisor, but kernels seem a bit more finicky. So in theory, they could probably be made to work, especially if you're willing to allow a hypervisor. So like the VM stuff, you could maybe in theory do it. None of these work as is on the kernel. None of them would work on that level yet. They're all user line focused. But I mean, the theory, in theory, these could be adapted to the kernel. I mean, speaking of the Linux kernel, I can never imagine Linus actually supporting putting in
Nope.
some
It won't happen.
de-optimized stuff like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it adds too much performance overhead for them to even consider it right now. Maybe if it gets lowered, like you were saying, some of them it's only 5%, but
The one
kernel
was
level,
actually less than 1%. It was like 0.24%. That was the
okay, so
CCR
that
one.
might be acceptable, but at kernel level, like you really like everything stacks on top of kernel level. So you can like the machine can only be as fast as kernel operates. So I know a lot of kernel devs would probably be hesitant about even thinking about that. And then on top of like all the work it would take to probably support that, like I don't think it'll happen. Were you gonna add something on there?
Well, I was just going to mention that the one in particular that ran with a really low overhead, the 0.24%, that one also happens to be a function level randomization at link time. So wouldn't really matter with the kernel. Because you're able, like, it's not getting rebuilt, you're running it. It's just a different layout. It's just a different version of the kernel, basically. It wouldn't actually make a difference for that one.
Yeah, it just seems like it's too.
I mean, some of these still might, but the one that was really low overhead was a build time thing, so it's basically not an issue with the kernel.
I could see maybe newer microkernels, like microkernels that are in development. I could see them considering it though.
Like, yeah, okay. So I was thinking monolithic kernels.
Yeah, I was too.
Going microkernel. Like, yeah, okay. I could see it too. I could see them doing, especially like the load time one.
Yeah, like I don't think we'll see the like in-memory rewrites or anything like that happening in like something like Windows or Linux or anything like that probably ever. Or if it is, it'll be a long way away.
Yeah, I don't see this happening anytime too soon, to be honest. This is still pretty new, and I mean the type of attacks it's going to stop. Like we kind of mentioned with this, it doesn't stop a lot of attacks. Like, I mean, the gadgets aren't getting corrupted by these. They're still there.
Yeah. And there is actually one other thing to consider in kernel too, and that's in kernel, because of like as talking about monolithic, obviously, there's a lot more functions for you to play with, and there's probably functions you could call where you don't even need ROP chains. You could probably just call like a magic function that would do what you want. So in that case,
Well, at least
breaking
one of
ROP
these
wouldn't even matter.
actually doesn't. It works a little bit below the function level at the block level, which is just
Okay.
kind of your. It's still some grouping, but it's not quite the function level. Doesn't make a huge difference though. Ultimately,
Yeah.
Real Nano user also asks, do the hypervisors do stop the world things, or do they run during runtime? I'm assuming you're asking about like the shuffler that we talked about, or the zipper that ran, or not. Yeah, zipper was the one. Like the randomization thing, if it actually stops the world. And I'm not sure. I don't know the technical details on how it works. They're mentioned in the paper. Well, those technical details aren't mentioned in the paper, but the algorithms are all mentioned in the paper. So you can probably take a look into that. We'll have the link in the description to the paper. Or, I mean, I guess you could look at the video and try and grab the temporary link for the PDF. But yeah, basically, I don't know exactly what it does for that. I've never actually encountered any of these.
Yeah. So we'll go back to the industrial case study. So one of the main focuses that they were talking about with Stride was hitting the automotive industry, and there was actually a survey done on vehicle security. So
The
did you want
survey,
to?
and I mean, I kind of just want to laugh at this one a bit, in all
Okay,
honesty.
all right, let's hear it.
Um, well, just they don't seem to recognize that a firewall goes both ways. They
Okay.
Their proposal here. So in most vehicle compromises, you compromise one of the ECUs, like the media center or something. You compromise that, and then you spoof messages from another ECU. So you'll send messages pretending you're the steering wheel from the media console or whatever. Like you spoof messages. So their suggestion here is an ice wall, as they call it, on each ECU that filters outgoing packets to match a particular format. They don't seem to like, and they even mention it's an ice wall for lack of a better word. But
Yeah,
I
they
mean, they
call it
don't
a
seem to realize
reverse
that that's a
firewall.
firewall. Yeah, it is a firewall. Firewalls go in both directions. And
Yeah,
they call it machine learning to auto configure the filter. And what they talk about is that it would look at the first couple packets that come from each ECU, and it would just hard code only allow those types of packets, like that
yeah,
identifier. That is machine learning. I guess you
yeah.
could say it is a couple if statements, so it's AI.
Hashtag define AI if. Um, yeah, it seems like their main focus in like their theoretical defense is trying to restrict which ECUs can send which kind of packets through to the CAN bus.
Yeah, and to be fair,
Um,
this would probably be pretty effective. I mean, I'm kind of laughing at the ice wall stuff. Like, in reality, if this were set up correctly, it would be pretty lightweight and it would be reasonably effective. Because you would have to compromise the particular ECU that you actually want to target.
yeah, and one way they proposed of implementing that is using authentication. So they propose using an integrity tag by
Well, was that
hashing
their
the
proposal? I
message.
thought that was from another paper. Because they give kind of and that's another thing. This paper does give a pretty decent summary of suggested security mechanisms and kind of other papers covering other attacks. I think that
Yeah.
came from one of the other papers suggesting authentication.
Okay, so maybe I misread then because they were talking about using Mac. So what was it? Encrypt then hash, I think. Yeah, they were talking about a few methods that are already being used, and they were trying to find which one was the best one. I just can't remember exactly where they were
Yeah, I
talking
don't
about that.
remember where that
Kind of a
is,
dense
but
paper. Yeah.
they cover a lot of different attacks and stuff. Like it is actually a pretty decent overview. It's a bit dense for sure, but it's not bad.
Yeah. They state the hardest issue they found to prevent was DOS attacks. So, they were talking about how they could potentially mitigate that with their ice wall. I'll never get over ice wall, dude. I laughed hard when I saw that. But my biggest concern with it is you got to make sure there's no false positives. Because, like, what if there are legitimate messages from ECUs that are going to get blocked by the firewall? And then, like, let's say it's from the steering ECU, and you're telling the car to turn left, and it's like, nope, this is malicious. I'm blocking this.
Yeah, that's why I would
Like,
not trust the auto config. But
Yeah,
if this were to become a standard, it seems like ECU manufacturers can actually provide the whitelist, because that's essentially what this is. This is just whitelisting packets. So an ECU manufacturer can provide the whitelist of what their ECU will produce. Like if this kind of became something that was adopted, it seems like something that if they just produce that, it would be easy enough to kind of generically implement the whole thing. Like I say, it would be an effective method. That said, I don't know enough about car hacking and what these CAN bus messages look like in practice to really comment on how practical it would be for the manufacturers to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I would not trust auto configuration on this at all.
No. So they do say that, at the end and the conclusion, they do say that this paper is mostly theoretical. They do plan to do future work on seeing, about practical implementation of it. So, there might be some more papers being released by them at some point later on that we can look out for. Maybe we can revisit it at a later podcast.
Yep, we need more ice walls.
They didn't really give a timeline on when they're planning to do that, but yeah. So there was a few releases that happened in the last couple of weeks. One of them was Zydus 3.0. So this is actually a x86 and x86-64 disassembler library. It's actually been out for a little while. I'm surprised.
Yeah, it looked like it was about 2 weeks.
Well, so Zydus has actually been out for
12
a few
days.
years.
Oh, yeah, I meant 3.0 was released 12 days
3.0.
ago.
Yeah. So, I wanted to bring it up just because I actually didn't hear about this before. Most of the time when you're talking about a disassembler library, your go-to is Capstone. Like, there's not really many.
It's the one I hear about the most, yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like this could be an alternative to Capstone, and that might be cool because Capstone can be a bit of a pain in the ass to use. I wrote a RE bot in Golang that's it basically does like disassembling and assembling for a few different architectures. So you can give it a string of opcodes and it'll give you the instructions, or a string of instructions and it'll give you the opcodes, and that uses Keystone and Capstone. And setting it up was kind of a pain. So because I remember I had some issues getting it working. I had to do some messing around. So, and I actually ended up going with a pre-built library because I couldn't really get it building properly. So, this might be a good alternative to look at.
Sometimes builds can be a pain. It looks like this one doesn't even require libc. So you can use this in a lot of...
What was that?
Sorry, it looks like this one doesn't even require libc.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can use this in a lot of places.
Yeah.
I like that. Tested in UEFI. In both user and kernel mode. As tested in there, so this can run in a lot of places.
Yeah, that's one thing I was actually going to bring up, is it seems to be extensively tested. Yeah, they said they tested it on Windows, Mac OS, FreeBSD. If it works on FreeBSD, that's already a pretty big accomplishment, because FreeBSD really sucks. So, it works there, it'll probably work anywhere. And they also actually have some official bindings. They said they have bindings for Pascal, Python, Rust, and they have some unofficial ones for Go and LuaJIT. I think I actually may take a look at this and see if, I don't know if I'll use it in REBot instead of Capstone, but
I mean, to some extent you've already got something in there, but
yeah, I don't know. It's promising.
It does. I mean, it's one of those things, obviously this isn't strictly speaking security, but obviously a lot of us do reverse engineering a disassembler. Like, we build our own tools, so it's related.
Yeah. So one thing I did want to take out of chat was Real Nano user talking about Intel XED, which I actually don't know much about. I've never really looked at it. And asking if Sidus is that much faster than that. If you actually take a look at the credits of the README, they actually do mention XCD, and they talk about them using it. So they were doing some comparison of their tables against, or like their tables against Intel's, and talking about improving both. So it seems like it does kind of try to improve on that a little bit. But yeah, like I just wanted to bring it up because it seems like Capstone kind of has a monopoly on disassembling.
Yeah, I
So
mean, Capstone's the one I always hear about, so.
yeah. So we also have another last minute addition to our tools page because it just happened today. Was IDA 7.4 was announced. So they have a few major features in it. One of them is Python 3 support for IDAPy.
Python 2 for
So
life.
Python 2 for I mean, yeah, I don't like Python 3 either, but
No,
some people
I've
do.
moved over to Python 3 now, to be fair.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually have two. I mean, I like Python too, but I think when are they planning to discontinue it? Like next year? Is it?
Yeah, it's coming up now, finally.
Yeah, it's pretty close. Um, but one thing that I wanted to point out that I was pretty happy to see, sadly, I'm probably not going to get my hands on 7.4 anytime soon. They have a new structure editor. Now, I'm going to say this, dude. I hate IDA's current structure editor. It sucks. It's awful. Have you ever used it?
Yeah, it's a bit clunky.
I mean, as far as I know, you can't really import and export from it easily. You can't really copy and paste. You have to use the D key to change the data type. And if an earlier thing in the struct was wrong, you have to. Oh, it just sucks. I hate it
Yeah.
so much. So they're changing it to like a text based one. So it's a lot more like what you would actually see in code. So it seems like you'll be able to copy and paste, and it'll be just way easier to work with. So it's nice that they finally did that. I'm surprised it took them this long. It's just sad that I'm probably not going to be able to see it for a while. So,
Eventually, you'll afford it. Or it'll be free.
eventually, yeah. uh, yeah, $10,000 for a proper struct editor, please.
Yeah, unfortunately, I just found out about this when you added the link, so I haven't had a chance to look at it yet.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot of bug fixes, and we covered like a lot of the bigger features. They also mentioned more GDB support. I think they added some more CPUs as well, or some more like ISAs to
Yeah.
support. So if you're doing some more obscure research where you needed to use some other tool before, maybe now you can use IDA. So uh, yeah, so if you're one of those people who has endless mounds of money and owns IDA, a supported IDA license, then yeah, you can grab 7.4 and use a structure editor that doesn't make you want to die. So we'd bring that up as a PSA for anyone who has to suffer through that, so that you can use a better one now. So yeah, that's all I have to say on the IDA release.
Yeah, I mean, we can go from that to government interference.
In Australia.
Yeah, so it sounds like basically they had two conferences. One of the conferences was kind of their information security professional conference, and another one was a bit more government focused. So the Australian Cybersecurity Centre conference and the Australian Information Security Association conference merged into CyberCon.
So which one was government operated again?
I believe that's the Cybersecurity Center.
Yeah,
Was the government?
yeah, it looks like it. Yeah.
Um, so they merge into this CyberCon, and then a week before the conference, two of the speakers are told that their talks are incongruent with the content of CyberCon. Those two speakers being Thomas Drake, and former NSA employee turned whistleblower, speaking about kind of the state of digital surveillance by the government and by companies. And I'll probably butcher the name, but Dr. Sulet Dreyfus from the University of Melbourne, talking about tech that would enable secure communication by whistleblowers. Frankly, these sound like exactly the type of topics that should be coming up in kind of those more professional environments.
Yep.
Like, I mean, what's incongruent about privacy in a security conference?
Yeah, and there were some weird things too. Like, they had a statement saying that media was banned from attending closed sessions, but everyone that wasn't media could attend them, so they weren't really
And could
closed
tweet about
sessions.
it.
Yeah, like it's so weird. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I could understand the government trying to hide certain things, but I don't know. I feel like, especially as like security's becoming a lot more professional, we need those forums kind of for discussing controversial opinions. And I don't, and to be clear, I don't think protecting whistleblowers should be a controversial opinion. Um,
no.
but we need those forums. Like, I don't think the government should be trying to block people from talking at a conference like this, even if it's kind of saying something negative against them. The discussion still needs to happen, and I would rather the government's actually be part of that discussion than it always being just against them. I would rather still like allow their side to speak also.
Yeah.
And when they kind of push things out, that also pushes them away. I mean, there's nothing we can do about this. Conference has already happened, but I just kind of wanted to mention that it did happen. That the Australian, and I mean Australia's been doing some backward stuff in general. Like, I think they did finally kind of like approve backdoor and encryptions. That
Yeah.
was a little while ago, but like that was Australia, so they don't have a great track record.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, like, I don't want to get too political, but it seems that Australia is the Australian government doesn't seem to have too many quarrels with censorship. There's been a few examples in the past that indicate that, they're not too huge on free speech or anything like that.
No,
I don't want to talk about them because I don't want to go off the rails, but
you
you
don't
know,
want to get banned from there.
yeah, I don't want to get banned from Australia. Yeah,
Gotta,
no,
you want to go to RuxCon, so
yeah, I mean, I just wish they'd do better. You know,
well, I mean, I kind
like
of wish everywhere would do better.
yeah, but it seems like Australia is like one
It
of the
is
only.
exceptional.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the only like developed countries that seems to be this against um like free speech. It's not like China or anything. I'm not trying to make
Yeah,
it seem
I don't know.
super
I
giant.
mean, I guess
It's
it's
not
kind of
as
the question of
free as the U.S. is.
yeah. Well, nowhere is really as free as the U.S. It's like the U.S. has a bit of an abnormal view on free speech, especially when it comes to hate speech. Like most countries do have hate speech laws and stuff, but whistleblowers, like that's different. Most
Yeah.
countries, protect the journalists, protect or try and have something in there to protect whistleblowers. Um, yeah, I mean, there's not much we can do about this though, but I think it's important to bring up the fact that it is happening and like be aware of it.
Bring some awareness to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing we should bring awareness to is the uBlock issue. So I saw this linked, and
So it's not blocked anymore, just so that's known.
okay. But so
Go
basically, what
ahead.
was happening was they had a development build, and it was rejected from the Chrome Web Store. And the reason they gave was super generic. It was a copy and paste message. They were saying, basically, an extension should have one clear purpose, and if you have an extension that tries to force users to accept bundles of unrelated functionality, then they won't allow it. Um, which is obviously very vague. I mean, you can interpret that many different ways. What counts
Yeah,
as a
I mean,
feature?
I could imagine
You know,
somebody calling it on uBlock just because of like the different filter lists and calling that as different features, like they should have a different app. That said, I don't think this was human generated. I don't think a human was involved in this. Or at
really.
least not until it got unblocked. Well, I don't think any person actually looking at this, working for Google, would block uBlock.
I don't
I,
know.
I
It
think that
seems
would cause a lot. I think any human who was in that, especially like it got unblocked through an internal escalation.
so.
I
Last I
imagine
looked
it
at
would
it,
have been
actually
like
wasn't unblocked yet. So yeah, that just
um
happened, I guess.
yeah, this morning I was reading it sounded like it was.
So if you go to the last comment actually by uBlock user, they say since then dev build has
Oh,
become unlisted in the store. So it seems like it's still an ongoing issue. It seems it's not totally discussed. But the one comment
unlisted
that caught
versus
me,
blocked is also kind of different.
yeah. But the one comment that kind of uh, caught my eye was they say since the next UBO release will essentially be what this development build is, they say consider that, you know, they don't think that uBlock Origin will continue to live in the Chrome Web Store. Obviously,
Yeah,
though, that was like that was 5 days ago, so there's been changes since then. But
yeah. I mean, my feeling is if it was automatic, though, it could be uh, get turned around or overturned by like a human. Because I could definitely see Google just having some automatic thing, and this just happened to fall, through the cracks on that. Because I mean, they're always trying to scale.
yeah, I mean, they actually mentioned that this has happened a few times in the past through
Yeah, he
improvements in
did
the
mention
past.
that there's like, yeah, 3 times further in the past.
Yeah, so I don't know, man. I just feel like I didn't think it was automated. I honestly thought it was a human because Google has a pretty strong incentive to block something like uBlock.
They have a
Because
strong incentive, and they've already made it clear that they do plan to deprecate the essentially they plan to deprecate the API that it's actually using to modify pages, so that you can't do blocking requests during that load. So that will disable uBlock. Like that's kind of already known that that's coming. That's why I don't
yeah,
feel like it would be a person doing it.
okay, fair enough. I mean, I just wanted to take this opportunity to kind of wonder if maybe it's worth checking out Firefox again. You know, we are talking about them earlier, about all the good stuff they're doing,
I mean,
and
I'm
all
a
the
fan of
bad stuff Chrome's
Firefox.
doing. So
And
yeah,
I,
I
I
think
say
you
that
use Firefox.
as,
So.
we're using Chrome for the browser in stream.
True, and we're using uBlock too. So, I mean, yeah, something we'd bring awareness to. It seems like it's still an ongoing thing. Um, so who knows where this is going to go? Because obviously, your alternative to uBlock is AdBlock Pro,
Well, so
which
I
I
don't
used to
think any
use.
of the ad blocks will work once they kind of block the ability to modify pages.
Oh yeah, I'm saying before that change happens.
Oh,
So like if uBlock is removed before they put through those changes, your alternative is AdBlock Pro. And problem with AdBlock Pro is they actually allow advertisers to pay them to whitelist their ads. So it's not as it's not as nice as a plugin. So hopefully, I use Chrome as my daily driver. So hopefully uBlock stays up until what you were talking about goes through. Um, but yeah, we'll just have to wait out and see. We'll just
yeah,
monitor it.
I guess we'll probably know like next week or whatever. I'm not sure what uBlock's release cycle is.
Yeah.
Um, really quickly in chat, there's a question there about incognito mode. Well, I'm not Spectre, I will say. I mean, incognito mode is basically just so you don't have a history. It's not private, it's not secret. All your
Yeah.
requests are still going through exactly the same way. You just don't have the cookies and the history and all that associated with it. It's not much. We're just using it so we kind of have the same page displayed on both of our browsers. So we're not
Yeah.
like one of us being logged in somewhere and the other not, and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, the incognito page even states like, it's only for the browsing history and stuff. Yeah, it's just the reason we're using incognito on the stream is that way it's separate so it doesn't, I have some other Chrome windows open that aren't incognito and we don't want it getting all mixed up. So we'll talk about Ken Thompson's Unix password. So you brought this up.
Yeah,
Uh,
I just thought this was a fun topic. Essentially, an old Etsy password file and a dump from, BSD3. So they mention actually how old it is.
I think they said from 2014, didn't they? Was it,
Well,
or
no, the dump's from 2014. Like that's where
Oh,
they found the Etsy password file. But no, it's got to be older than that because this is still using DES and stuff.
oh, okay. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have too much information in it. It's mostly just
Yeah,
talking
just a
about
fun.
old
They
passwords
basically
that came
just
up.
cracked this old password. I believe old password. Yeah, I'm not.
Hopefully, he's not still using it.
I wouldn't imagine, but it took them quite a while to crack it too. But yeah, it's now I'm not seeing there, which I guess is apparently a chess notation for some move.
Yeah, I thought we could talk about this a little bit. My initial thought was I thought that was pretty cool, a cool idea for a password. It's it seems random when you look at it, but it's actually, it's memorable in the way that if you play chess a lot and you know that sequence, makes a lot
Which I
of
don't. So
sense. Yeah, I don't either. But on the other hand, I started thinking about it more, but like if somebody knows that you like chess a lot, it seems like something like that could be guessed by somebody who is just
well,
trying a bunch of
so
combinations.
are you familiar with like what this means? Because I don't really know
What
the actual sequence that's
the
on
actual
this.
sequence? No,
Is
they
that
just say
something that you
it's
would know though? I don't know if it's something you would think to guess, even if you know somebody likes chess.
yeah, fair enough. I just thought it could be interesting to think about, like, because they do say directly in here that it's not too surprising. Like they say it fits very well to Ken Thompson's background in computer chess. So
Yeah, but I mean, when you're targeting a password, to guess that is still pretty significant.
yeah. Um, Going from chat with that question about the new filter mode and the XSS auditor, I thought they were removing the XSS auditor in Chrome. I thought they were taking that out entirely. Isn't that?
Well,
Am I wrong?
I'm not. They are removing something with the XSS. I'm not a Chrome user, so I don't pay a ton of attention to this. But I think we did talk actually on one of our last episodes before our break about the XSS auditor being removed.
Yeah, like it seemed to like it's too easy to bypass. It's mainly just a pain in the ass more than anything else.
Yeah, so I
And
mean, element 1423. If you want to kind of, I guess, be more specific with the question, we can definitely, try and answer it if we can. But yeah, I'm not too sure what you're really asking with it, just with what you've got there now.
yeah, one thing I will say about why they want to why they said they wanted to remove the XSS auditor in the earlier podcasts when we were talking about it was it kind of made vendors think that XSSs weren't important anymore because the XSS auditor would block it. Meanwhile, it's easy to bypass, so it's kind of a false sense of security that it provided.
Yeah, I've definitely
So
had clients like that. That well, it's not an issue because they only support Chrome, and well, I just tried in Chrome, and your proof of concept didn't work.
wait, what's up?
I've had clients that have kind of done that,
Oh,
where
okay, yeah.
they've decided that well, since the proof of concept didn't work in Chrome,
We don't
um,
care about it. Yeah.
uh, yeah, Element. I'm sorry, I don't know enough about like the difference between the block and filter mode to comment on it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we don't really do web stuff. We focus more on binaries, so uh yeah, I can't really answer that one either, to be honest.
I mean, if you gave me a bit, I could probably look into it. But yeah, uh, we'll just move on. We're actually kind of on our last topic here, so I can't subtly look into it while Spectre's talking. And that
No,
is, I mean, this bundle. Honestly, it's not an amazing bundle, but I figured some of you at least might be interested in. It's got about a week left on it. Just some Linux and Unix books.
a
Nothing too
bundle of
exciting. Bunch of O'Reilly books. It's not security, but security adjacent.
books with ultra generic covers.
Well, I mean that's the O'Reilly style.
Yeah. Although actually, I'm thinking of another bundle. There was another bundle you linked, wasn't there? that was like,
Yes, there was another bundle,
what
and
one
I
was that?
did not. Well,
Can
they're
you bring it
books.
up
It's
just so
this
we can
one.
talk about it? I just want to hear you shit on it a little bit. It's fun.
Well, it's not so much that I want to shit on L, because I have not read any of these books. It's
Yeah.
just judging all these books by their cover. Like, these just look like terrible books. I have no idea what they are, but like Excel 2016 Programming Pocket Primer sounds really exciting. And I mean, this AutoCAD 2020 is ahead of the curve, 'cause it's not even 2020 yet. They do have 19 book, but no, just looking at these book covers just make them look terrible. No idea how good the content is. I guess this is from Mercury, I think was the publisher. Mercury Learning. I'm not too familiar with them, so I have no real comment on the quality of it. I'm just judging books by their cover.
Okay. But yeah, that wasn't the one you were recommending. It was the other one, the Linux and Unix one.
Correct.
Which, could be useful if you're doing Linux stuff. You'll want to get familiar with the command line tools, stuff like that. Makes life a lot easier. They have a book on Vim. I think that's a bit of an issue. We only like Nano in our Linux development, so
Yeah, actually, maybe we'll
just pretend that book.
We'll
isn't
just not recommend this anymore.
there. Yeah.
But we'll go back there, the other one.
Yeah, so that pretty much sums up all of our topics. We will be back again next week. Hopefully, Auntie will be back from his Thanksgiving vacation by then. That actually reminds me, when is American Thanksgiving? Because I can never remember. It's in a few weeks, right? I know it's in November. I just don't know when.
I think it's the last weekend of November.
Last weekend, okay.
Yeah, November.
So
28th.
it's not really. Yeah, it's not really going to affect us then, because we're. Do they do Monday off as well?
Well, there's Cyber Monday. Maybe we'll talk about some deals we find.
Oh, that'd be pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah, that'll be fun. So, yeah, so, again, I'll bring it up. I mentioned it at the beginning of the stream, but on Wednesday at 8 p.m., I'll be doing a stream on the Android binder stuff. It'll be a bit of a learning experience for me, too, because I haven't done anything with Android in terms of exploitation. So maybe we'll hit a few fun snags and stuff like that and try to work with the VM. But
hopefully everybody gets to learn something.
Yeah, I mean, I'll mostly be focusing at first on just trying to understand the bug and reading the reports and stuff like that, because I haven't really looked at it at all. I thought it'd be cooler to look at that on stream. That way, people who are newer to Vuln research can see what kind of goes into that analysis. And then we'll probably try to exploit it after that as well. The question in the chat about PS4 related stuff I had muted on Twitter. I actually don't mute anything on Twitter. I don't really have anybody blocked or anything. I try to avoid doing that. I might have one person blocked. Takes pretty extreme things to get me to block people. Most of the time I just ignore it. So, there's your answer for that. So Z just linked our YouTube channel in the chat for the VOD. It's also under the stream for when you guys want to check it out. But yeah, so I think that's it. Is there anything you wanted to end off with before we?
No, that's our last topic. We'll see you guys next week.
All right, yeah. So we'll see you guys next week, and tune in to the Wednesday stream where we talk about the Android stuff, and we'll see you guys then.